the question is, how do you explain divine intervention when so often the occurrences we're dealing with are not pleasant, even tragic, and yet sometimes they always turn out to have a positive side, even a reward that would have been impossible without the tragedy? Okay, the this has a lot to do with the pronoun I, and a lot to do with what we mean when we speak of I. And in fact, a great deal of the confusion in the Bible between Christianity and self-realization, which another way of saying yoga, is a misunderstanding of what Jesus meant when Jesus said I. Because Jesus, when he said I, he was in his body, he was activating his body, but his self-definition, he himself said, I and my Father are one. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven. And his whole reality was expanded from, it included the body he was in, Mother Mary, all of that was part of it, but it was very much, if you think of it like a funnel, and we think of this experience as the wide part of the funnel, and it's just the opposite. This is the most contracted part of the funnel, and most people live with a kind of lid, a lid of consciousness, so we see ourselves in this context. And we define ourselves and we identify with that. And when I say I mean Asha. I was born in El Paso, Texas. I left there when I was 15. I've been in California. I'm in a female body. I mean, I can go on. And that's all Asha. And it is. Except, what is the activating principle of Asha? And if you think of yourself like this, you realize that I am a receiving station for this tremendous energy. I just don't know it. So when Jesus said I, he meant Jesus in the body, but he was conscious simultaneously, literally to infinity, because how far does it go out? So when we talk about, from the perspective we live in with the artificial lid on the pot right here, where we think we're born, we think we're a baby, we think we're an adult, and we are. We think we're only a baby, only an adult, only in this body. You have to put reincarnation into it, otherwise it simply doesn't work. Otherwise the equation breaks down. But let's, for the sake of discussion here, we've got in reincarnation. So if I see it only from what pleases this body and pleases this little self, and ego is simply the infinite spirit identified with this body. But even Jesus identified with the body he had. He just didn't limit his identification to it. So I identify with it because I'm responsible for this one. Swami Kriyananda used to say, I never identify as Swami Kriyananda. He is an event for which I am responsible, which I thought was a really fun way because he was responsible for it. So this doesn't get you off the hook. But it's an event that a greater power is responsible for. So from the perspective of here, I want this body to be comfortable. I want this person to be loved by other people. I don't mind being admired. I don't mind having a lot of followers on social media. I mean, all these things can be true and still be true. But what is really going to be good? Is it good if my life is easy and pleasurable? I'm never asked to grow. I'm never asked to expand. I get to decide what I want, and how wise am I? Or am I on a longer journey of which this is just one chapter? And what needs to be cultivated is ever expanding awareness of my true self, which often means that something shocking has to happen to this little self. Otherwise, just like a clam in the shell, you just hunker down and just enjoy it. But then somebody comes and breaks the shell, and all of a sudden, but then you discover parts of yourself that you didn't know were there because you're not so comfortable in this little tiny thing. What causes people to ask really deep questions, which bring really deep answers? It's when it doesn't work anymore. It just stops working. And we have a compelling desire to be happy. And we know that suffering, there's something wrong. If our true nature was to suffer, we'd just suffer. There would be nothing in you that would rebel because there would be nothing to rebel against. But whenever we suffer, we rebel. And when the old systems don't work anymore and suffering continues, we're driven to ask another question. So we talk about God as Father, Mother for very good reason, because we understand the parental-child relationship. Not everyone has a positive association, but we at least have the concept. Children are ignorant and gradually become wiser. Children have extremely strong opinions about what they think should happen, but they're really stupid and they don't know really what's good for them. And so mother and father have to help them. And sometimes the children get really mad. A wonderful friend of mine, when she began to learn about reincarnation and various things that Yogananda said about conception, Yogananda said, when the sperm and ovum unite, there's a flash of light in the astral world, and those souls that are in tune with that light will rush toward that light. It sounds extremely disorganized to me, but that's how he put it. And he said, and sometimes more than one will get into the womb. Okay, my friend heard me say this. She tells me the story about her son. Her son she said he was about 5 years old, and she disciplined him for some reason, and he was, like children do, it's a total tragedy if they don't get their way. I hate you, you're a terrible mommy, he says. And then he stomps off toward his room. He decided that wasn't quite enough. So he came back and he said, you weren't even my first choice. And at that time she knew, she didn't have any context for it. So she was very interested. She said, well, honey, who was your first choice? And he answered, a lady in the Philippines, but she was taken. Wow. And then when she heard me talk, she said, he's a bright man, and he's a man now, of course, and he does strong things, but he has this quality where he'll become very interested in something and he'll start toward it, but then he'll stop for just a minute and think. She can see him in the astral world, heading for the lady in the Philippines, stopping for a minute to think about it, and then she was taken. Oh. And he was stuck with this lemon that he had. So what the actual answer to that is, how do we know? What makes us so smart? Even we don't even have the imagination to understand what our potential is, and yet we're constantly asserting it. That reality is wrong and I'm right. And if you're not, if you've many explanations, at a certain point we just become tired of suffering. And we become so tired of suffering that we're actually willing to have a different thought. And there's a change, and this is the way I always think of it. You can either say, God, what are you doing? Or you can say, God, what are you doing? Same response, but you can see how different it is. And at a certain point, we get hammered enough. Usually the question is put to me like this: what about the suffering children? It's very hard, because the crux point of really having faith in God is suffering. Either your own suffering, or if you become reconciled to that, the suffering of others. And unless you can come to a mature understanding that suffering is a means to wisdom, then it's very hard to believe in God, because that's just the way it is. And we hold that for as long as we want to. Does that help? Okay.
Yeah. I always wonder, don't you, why is all this suffering? Well, why does God let all these bad things happen?
Because
it's always a question.
Well, because people have to learn from experience, and they don't learn from being told.
Yeah.
And so people behave badly because they need the experience of behaving badly. When you add reincarnation into it, it becomes more relaxing. If you expect justice between birth and death in one lifetime, then it's very hard to get God into the story, because justice doesn't happen between birth and death. But justice will happen if you let it run long enough. Are there adults taking care of whoever it is? Yeah. Whoever it is just objecting to reality, and it's not working. Okay, Carmen. Right. Okay, so the question is, what is the role of creativity
And imagination just in this whole
in
play.
this whole story?
Yes.
Um, well, we are meant to realize God within us, and there's certainly nobody more creative than God. I mean, look at this story. I mean, just look at this very small group of people. Like no two of us had even, well, you guys are fairly similar in your concept of what a human being should be, but almost everyone, we're all just completely original. And even you guys don't really match. You look like a pair, let's just put it that way. But you can see, look at it, all of it, so different. And when all the people up there, every single person you looked at, and everyone is created, and this just fascinates me. Every one of us has a complete story. You know, we'll sit here together, we can share together, but when you walk away, you're going to walk away with your whole story. All the things that ever happened to you, all the things you inspire. So creativity is happening, you know, every single day is very different. And our goal to be, when we really become attuned, is that we become instruments of that divine energy. That's what we're wanting to be, a channel for God, a channel for divine light. I mean, what is love? That's a synonym for the divine. Everything that we do. Also, what we're trying to do is we're trying to break out of fixed ideas of what's true and fixed ideas of who we are. You know, we get into a pattern, and the battle between delusion and enlightenment is a battle of putting out energy, because the divine force is very powerful and it frightens us a little. So we hunker back down and we just repeat what we already know. And as people get older and older, sometimes they really repeat what I already know. As I always say, you know, and I talk a lot, so I hear myself repeating, and it kind of creeps me out when I start repeating. But sometimes there's just no other analogy as good as the one I said yesterday, so I try it again. I try to forget everything I said so I don't have to feel like that. Okay, that's one side of it, is that the opportunity to be in the moment and see the situation in entirely new light is a divine quality, because we're not identified and locked into what was. We're in the now, and we're asking what's true today. Okay, that's part of it. The other part of it is we are part of this great creation. We're just inextricably involved in the people who came before us, um, the experiences that we had before, the country we incarnated in, the karma of the planet. We're not separate. We can't, and if we just think in terms of expressing my little lidded tiny piece of who I am, our options are very small, and we've cut ourselves off from this great flow of energy. So whenever you try to be creative in a real sense, not just rearranging what's known and putting it in a different order, but actually being in the moment and bringing out something that's from your point of origin. That's what the word originality really means. To be original is to operate from your point of origin. Doesn't mean to do something that's never been done before. I mean, if you say to someone, I love you, I mean, really, how absolutely cliche can you be? I mean, how many billions of people have said that? But it's actually original, it's from your point of origin, and you're really saying it. It's never been said before. So we're always trying to just move from that point. And the more we can move from our point of origin, the more we are in tune with the divine. So we need ways to practice. And that's where artistic creativity comes in. And as it happens, one of the unique aspects, both of Yogananda's teaching and Kriyananda's teaching, is a very, very different attitude toward creativity. In the past, and you heard me talking about Kali Yuga, in the age that's just ending, the monastic ideal was that you overcome your selfish ego by suppressing it. And so you just become a monk or a nun in the monastery. You never do anything on your own. You only obey what's said to you. And even if the instructions are stupid, you do them, you know, just so that you won't dare express yourself. The opposite of that is, well, I just was talking about Swami wrote 400 pieces of music, and think 150 books by the time his life was over. He created a whole new way of life in our communities, a new way of educating children. It goes on and on and on. It was the exact opposite. And Yogananda was just the same. He wrote music, he wrote poetry, he wrote books. I mean, Jesus didn't write any books. Krishna didn't write any books. But Yogananda's presenting a whole new way of being in tune with God, which is expansive. And when you start doing something creative, if you really get in tune, you become a flow of energy. You know, when you're dancing, when you're singing, when you're really lost in it, when you're doing any kind of creative work, when you're, I listened to Marcia talk about being an engineer. You know, when you're an engineer and you're watching how those things go together, you lose identification with yourself and you become identified with the flow of energy. My primary form of art is that I write books. Not, I can say plural now, but I write. And when I'm really into that, nothing exists. I mean, I'm still there doing it, but I'm identified only with that flow of energy. And when I forget myself and identify with the flow of energy, I can really tell how that energy should go. You know, just even like, no, that's the wrong word. That one's not going to work. And then later I can feel it. This was right. This is what belongs. And it's not intellectual. I'm not reasoning it. It's just there it is. But that's how I want to live all the time. But on an everyday basis, I keep remembering who I am, which is highly unfortunate. But 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 because I know what it feels like to lose track of myself, I know what it feels like to be in tune with the energy and not being guided by the ego, by the egoic limitations, so that I can then not only can I judge my artistic output, my creative output, I can also judge my whole life. Because I learn from creativity what I'm supposed to be when I'm just being me. Because this is the real creative act, isn't it? You know, this is who the artist is really the artist's product, if you want to think of it like that. Now, artist product is only a representation of their consciousness. So creativity, Swami, guess what, wrote a book about it. But it's really interesting. Creativity is a path to self-realization. And it's something that we're all, those of us who are involved in the Ananda side of it, we're all just really trying to figure this out. And what is good art? What makes it good art? And how do I become an artist so that I can become an artist in my life? And imagination is part of that, because if we can't see something that isn't there, we can never make anything new. You know, we have to be able to look and I think of Marcia because I was listening to her earlier. You know, she just saw the possibility of a whole bunch of different things that weren't there before. But she had the imagination. The world was not bound by what was already here, but it was bound by whatever could possibly be here. And you see how much that liberates us to just do it. So imagination, and in that context, I tend to make jokes. And Swami Kriyananda was extremely humorous, so there was often a lot of laughter around him. And he asked me some very simple question, and I gave a very sassy but very funny answer. And after we stopped laughing, I said, "What is that? Like, what makes me make a joke?" And there could be lots of explanations. He gave a nice one. He said simply that to a certain extent, kindly humor, not unkind humor, but kindly humor is a spiritual quality, because it requires that you have enough detachment from apparent reality to imagine the situation completely differently. You know, and you can see just even that flexibility, which is why often people who have some level of spiritual freedom are also very funny. Because they look at it and they think, you know, why is that actually a hat? Why is that not a pomegranate? You know, but yeah. Anyway, but you see, all of it's very important. Yogananda himself said that the power to visualize another reality is extremely helpful. Now, it all has to be anchored in intuition and not just in an unhinged mental state. So let's just assume that we're working with a degree of psychological health here. Okay. Okay. The question was, how do you live from the open third eye? Some vocabulary is not my vocabulary, so I'll translate into what I would say. Of course, what you're talking about is the chakras, which go from the base of the spine, actually to the top of the head, but this is the relevant point. This is the center of Christ consciousness, and this is the esoteric explanation of why. Well, this is the Christ consciousness, which is the power of spirit in this world. This is the Father, which is the power of spirit beyond this world. This is why Jesus said, "No one comes unto the Father except through me." It was a very metaphysical, esoteric statement that when we bring all our energy to a focus at the spiritual eye, that's when this center opens. But you can't go directly to here. You have to first realize in the world that you're living in that this is also the divine world, and then you can transcend it. That's just vocabulary. In the primary teaching about the chakras, which I learned from Kriyananda and from Yogananda's, I learned everything. Let me just get this straight. This is also, the whole chakras are very important to your question. If you go to my YouTube channel and just type in chakras, there's probably 100 hours of classes on it because it's so interesting. Okay, so the 5 chakras from the base of the spine up to the throat basically describe the qualities that are required for a balanced life: security, energy, security, creativity, energy, love, communication, like this. And when all those chakras are in order, your whole life moves in a beautiful way. 'Cause this is basically your human personality all through here. And the chakras have basically 2 ways that the energy can flow. They either, because the energy is circulating constantly, the Kundalini energy is going up and down through, and it's actually zigzagging through the chakras like this. And the energy, people talk about the chakras being blocked, which is a way to think about it, but what the chakras actually do is they leak. This is my own vocabulary. This is like the gospel according to Asha. Nobody says this but me. Okay? Because each of those qualities represent something that is essential for us to be able to function in this world effectively. And one of the ways you can help yourself to function effectively is when you understand the quality of each chakra, and then you look at your life and you see where the gaps are, then you can change the energy from the inside as well as work from the outside, and it's obviously much more effective. So the first chakra is the one that makes it most clear, and I'm getting to your question. Okay? The first chakra represents security, which everybody needs security. I mean, 90% of the problems that people have in life is because they're insecure, and it makes us crazy, and we do goofy things. And so mostly because the senses look outward and this world looks, really solid, the energy at the first chakra goes out to the world to make me secure. I will have somebody who loves me, then I will make children who will take care of me and give me something to love and maybe be important, then I'll be important, then I'll have money, then I'll have a house. And it's very reasonable and not wrong. I mean, these are the things that we do. But if the energy of the first chakra just goes out and tries to make itself secure in this world, sooner or later it doesn't work because this world is beyond our control and we can't really make it do what we want it to do. So, but what we really want is we want to seek security in our relationship to truth and in our relationship to God, because then it's eternal. So if our security is that I've got it fixed out here, we're always vulnerable. If our security is, I understand that I have a loving divine mother, and that's where my security comes from. And then I'll get somebody to love me, and I'll have children, and I'll have a house, and I'll have a bank account. And because that's the things that I do, that's how I make the event of my life happen properly. But my security is not going horizontally, so to speak. My security is running up to the spiritual eye. And it's because, and there's one more thing that Yogananda put into this, which is very interesting. I'm going like this. The 6th chakra up here, people tend to talk about it as the spiritual eye. But he said the opposite pole of the 6th chakra is the medulla. And the medulla is where The individual identifies itself with the limitation presented by one body. Yogananda said when the sperm and ovum unite, this is the first spot, and it's from this spot. The first thing that happens in this book that I saw a long time ago, Your Developing Embryo, it starts from here, and the first thing that happens, it looks like a matchstick because it makes the chakras. The soul makes all the chakras. And then from the chakras, each of the chakras creates the part it's responsible for. Isn't that fascinating? So most people live from the medulla because we are identified with our limitation. And most people, when they die, fall backwards into the medulla. They sink back, and then they're reincarnated identified with another body. So what we're trying to do, spiritually speaking, is we're trying to shift the identity from the medulla to the spiritual eye, whether you call that open or not open, but that's how he describes it. And so what we're always trying to do is we're always trying to see ourselves in relation to the expanding funnel instead of seeing ourselves as the little bit that's here. I have a certain amount of money. Somebody would be benefited by having that money. If I'm just this limited reality, then I need to keep this money for myself because that's what would be the right thing. If I have begun to experience this, I look at you and I see the same divine that's in me. And when I give you the money, I'm giving it to myself in a very real sense. I'm giving it to myself in another body. I'm giving it to God. And so my self-identity is literally expanding from here to here, which is why all the acts of charity, everything that we do, all that service, is so that we will see that I'm not as small as I appear to be, And the more we live that way, the more automatically we begin to think from our unity with higher consciousness rather than our identification with limited consciousness. So whatever the word in the way you mean it means open, it's more like where is your origin point of energy? And when this energy is strong, when we're strongly focused here, then we draw the energy through all the chakras, and our decisions and our guiding force is from the spiritual eye. So Yogananda and all saints and masters say we should live more from this awareness, which you can literally feel it in yourself. And this is why people who are proud look down their noses at people like this. I was with Swami Kriyananda. Actually, we were in Dallas, Texas, as it happens, but it was many years ago. And he at the Unity Church, which was a big Unity church in Dallas, and Swamiji was talking about this somehow. And he talked about how people who are egoic get a lot of tension like that and look like that. And there was a sort of, he didn't hear it. I was in the audience. There was a snicker that went through the audience because, forgive me, the minister. And it was just his habitual posture. And when Swami said it, all the people started going. Fortunately, Swami didn't know it, but afterwards we just laughed so much. But he, because there's tension here. This is also why the universal gesture of humility is to bow your head, because you're releasing the tension from here and letting the energy flow to here. So that's why in Kriya Yoga meditation, which is what Yogananda teaches us, your point of concentration is here. Because the more you magnetize this point, the more the energy habitually flows through this point, not through this one. Or you bring the energy up to here and then you offer it into that light. And there's no open and closed. It's because until we're completely free and there's no karma left in the chakras, we're gonna be a whole troop of soldiers, and some of them are going to be at the goal, and some of them are still going to be back in the barracks tying their boots. So it's a question more of increasing the concentration at this point, to literally just look at life more that way, look at other people that way. Oftentimes when I'm have been in a counseling situation or even a friendship situation that's tricky and I don't quite know what to do, I say to people, don't just pray to God for what to do, but pray to the higher consciousness of the person you're trying to help and ask them, what do you need from me? I mean, this is inwardly. But if you actually look at people and think of them as existing here without being weird, you know, preferably not to be weird, but just in your own self, feel like you're relating, in all things, feel like you're relating from the spiritual eye. And then the balance of energy begins to shift because you're constantly, magnetism creates, energy creates magnetism, and magnetism draws more energy to it. So, now I'm finally saying, what you want to do is you want to magnetize the spiritual eye, because the more magnetic it is, the more you will naturally begin to flow into it. Does that make sense? And how you do that is one day at a time, perhaps 30 minutes at a time, perhaps 8 minutes at a time. And then when you find that you've slipped away, you just start again. And every time you feel this, then you have to do something right away about it. Yeah? All right. Pardon me, the question was, how much does sexual chemistry play into the selection of a mate? That is a really hard question. There's no dogmatic answer, but start with the fact. My opinion, it's just absolute chaos right now in our society in terms of people finding each other and then knowing what to do with it once they find each other. Because we are completely fragmented in terms of families. There's very few generational families together. Even if there are, you have maybe, two parents if you're lucky. Maybe you just have one, or you have, the phrase, my father's wife, my mother's husband. These are like things that are in the conversation a lot now that were never in the conversation before. You never even thought about it, but now you think about it all the time. Of course, people were widowed and would remarry, but it wasn't as common as it is now. Okay, let me go on with that just a second. So, and even if you're fortunate enough to have observed a marriage, maybe that marriage was honorable and admirable, maybe it wasn't. But as a child, it's very hard to gauge what's going on with your parents. You do not have aunts and uncles around. You don't, it used to be, and I'm not really saying this was better, but at least you had some pictures around you. You had different generations, you had different things, and you could sort of see how people interacted. And if you were observant, you might learn something from it. Not that you had to, but you might. Okay, we have nothing now, nothing. We have so many divorced families and just so much chaos in so many ways. So people's source of understanding of romantic relationships is the movies, is our novels, is what you see on Netflix or the other things you see, and what the music tells you, And all of that, what all of that has in common, it's all fiction. But we don't have a reality story. We just have a fictional story. And I literally had some woman come to me and with great passion tell me that the kind of relationship she wanted was, and then she named some movie, which as it happened, I happened to see, which I thought was a horrible movie about some completely superficial, just awful relationship. And she presented it to me as the ideal relationship she was seeking, quite apart from the fact that it was awful, which was a matter of opinion. The whole context, it was complete fantasy. And then you add to that the fact that sexuality, which used to at least be slightly behind a curtain, is now, I'm in India, which you would think of as a conservative country. Here everybody's having to put scarves around their yoga pants. I'm in the Mumbai airport not very long ago, and I'm drinking coffee with my friends waiting for the plane. There's a big screen over here. It was pornographic. It wasn't, they were still lightly dressed, but everything that they were doing on the screen was just appalling from any point of view of dignity or even good art. The only thing it had going for it was that it was sexually stimulating at all. Mumbai's a very modern city, and it's sort of, it's different, but still, it's like, Mamma Mia, So the incredible distortion of the importance of sexuality is really confusing the game, because it's a very important part of a relationship, because it's one of the things that drives us together, because it's just necessary. It's a human. Swami Kriyananda said, he said many things, but one thing he said was, It's very unfortunate that we can't just talk about sex as easily as we talk about other physical imperatives. We talk about the need to eat, to sleep, to put on a sweater if you're cold, which are also physical imperatives. We have a physical body. Sexuality is an imperative of the physical body. It would be nice if we could just talk about it, but everybody gets very confused when we start talking about it. But it is a physical imperative, and therefore grounding it in a satisfying monogamous situation is better for the human heart, and it's certainly better for society. But it just, I mean, the only way I've ever been able to answer this is to say it just is what it is. But it's a physical imperative, and we are much more than that. So what happens? It's not whether sex is important or not. It's what happens afterwards. It's what you do with it. If it's the beginning, middle, and end of why you're together, unless you're extremely dull, you know, it's just gonna not be enough. And this is the great secret that us older folks know. Yeah, amen. 34 years and yeah, yeah. It's that it helps. It really helps a lot. But if it assumes too great, if the expectation is too great, and if other qualities that are far more lasting and far more important are sacrificed or never paid attention to because of the obsession here, it will not work out very well. And it's just as simple as that. It won't work. However, if that energy is not satisfied and that energy is strong in you, that also may not work out very well. But the disproportionate preoccupation in our society is, you may have heard me say this. This is what a collapsing civilization looks like. You know exactly what we're watching. This is what it looks like when a civilization collapses, which is it loses all higher values. It loses all refinement. It celebrates the least refined aspects of human nature. I mean, sexuality is wonderful if it creates a bond that then leads to something else. But to just think that by itself it's going to be it'll satisfy your life, no. Not if you have more than one neuron functioning.
We have 50 years marriage.
Congratulations, my friend. Because there are examples, good examples, but everybody who has a good example can give you a good answer. Yeah. The question was, when you really know that somebody would benefit from the great advice that you have to give them, but they don't have the responsive intelligence to know that you're right. Am I misstating the question? Okay. Then what do you do? Okay. I remember that I was urging a certain change upon someone and they were not interested, strongly, intensely not interested. And, in a community we have lifelong friends, so relationships, marriage is not the only lifelong. In fact, in our community, it's really interesting because sometimes you can't tell who's married to who because a lot of us have been together for 40 years anyway. And it's different. I mean, that's not impossible. There's a unique quality, but still. But I was urging a change on someone and they were resisting me. And I do not know how Swami Kriyananda got into the middle of it, but somehow he was in the middle of it. And so he was talking to me because I was really the offending party in the case. And I said, but sir, don't you think it would be better for them if you just did what I'm suggesting? He says, oh, of course, it would be just exactly right for them. He said, and then he doesn't say things like this, but it was like, read my lips, Asha. They are not interested. It's not a priority for them. It's your priority, but it's not their priority. Like they're growing in another way. And for you to tell them that they ought to grow in this way, you have to start from the fact that it's futile. And once you recognize that it's futile, and then if you go, and if you're talking about marriage, it's also extremely damaging to the relationship. Because this poor person is in a constant state of being judged and condemned. And they are either unwilling or in many cases simply incapable. It looks to you like it's a simple matter, but you don't know what the karmic compulsion is inside them unless you're intuitive enough to see it. And if you were, you wouldn't be insisting. that it's just not up for them. There's other karmas that are just more on the top of it. So during the years when I was doing more couples counseling, this was my suggestion. If this person remains exactly the same, never changes one iota for the rest of your life, are you better off with them or without them? And that is really the question. The question is, does this bust up the relationship? And if it doesn't, then you have to change. And if it does, then you have to act on it. Because some things are utterly unacceptable, but most of them are just annoying. They're just annoying. And there it is. What can you do? But if you're honest, whoever your partner is probably has their own list too. Moi? Yes, exactly. Because it doesn't, see, I learned this from Swami Kriyananda, he never, he never tried to pull you into a higher understanding until he could see that you were ready for it. Just as simple as that. And it didn't, I mean, I watched the situations. This is a real story. There was this man in our community who was really annoying. He just had a whole lot of ways of being that were just super annoying. And sometimes he would do things that were annoying, that were upsetting to, that were inappropriate in Swami's company. He wasn't gross. He was just annoying. And Swamiji said at one point, after some thing that happened in a group, where the guy was rude and he just didn't seem to know what was appropriate. Swami said, I have to speak to him. And we all said, yes, yes, And because I had a very, I had an intuitive understanding a lot of what Swamiji was doing, because he told me early on that he wanted me to write about him. So he explained himself to me, because he knew that I was going to have to do this. So I could often read the energy. So finally, Swamiji, in fact, there was a big group practice. There was music was about to happen. The music was starting. Swami, it was just the moment. He just laid into this guy. And Swami was not, when I say that, he spoke firmly. He spoke firmly, he spoke definitely, and he said the truth. But he did it in a kind way. There was no temper. Somebody else was so excited they kept trying to start the song. Swami just kept raising his voice. That's why in my memory the voice is raised, because somebody was trying to play the guitar, but this was the moment. It was 10 years later. Yeah, 10 years later. But it was a straight line, because he wanted to tell him, he knew, but it took 10 years before the moment was right.
What made the moment right?
The guy had changed enough that he could hear it. He had learned enough lessons. Enough things had happened that now all of a sudden, he'd been through some hard times. He was more humble. Some preliminary conversations had happened, He was just ready for it. I had the amusing experience, because I have a very clear memory. Swami would make a suggestion to me that I was unable to follow. And then 3 or 4, 5 years later, I knew him for 45 years. He would just bring it up again, as if it was the first time. And no, it was not the first time. And he would know that I knew it was not the first time. But we just play it out. We can say that we want to be told, be straight with me, tell me, but we rarely do. I mean, almost no one really wants it. To really be able to be honest enough to be humbly corrected is a very high level. I know, it's very sad. This is the hard thing about human relationships, is there's somebody else involved. Carver. The question is, sometimes we have to make very tough choices in terms of the company we keep, because we have run out of creative capacity to relate to someone. And okay, here's the starting point. You're not more important than anybody else, but you're not less important. So the thing you have to start with is that it's an even playing field. We're all equally loved by God. And each one of us needs to do our best to create the best good for the greatest number. but that also includes you. And if in the process of, quote, creating good for others, you create bad for yourself, then no good has actually been created. There's a principle that has always been, is one of Ananda's mottos, so to speak. Um, we use the word dharma, which means righteous action, which is expansive and moves us toward God. I mean, probably most of you know that. Where there's dharma, there is victory. And it's an amazingly useful thing because dharma is to do that which creates the greatest good for everyone, or is, let me phrase it differently, is in tune with divine law. And for you to sacrifice yourself to no real purpose except to allow this woman friend of yours to continue to run the same useless tape that she's been running, and now she runs her useless tape and you're also being dragged to the ground, this is not dharma because it's not in tune with truth and it's not in tune with the what the divine power wants. So one of the very hardest things to do is to be able to live by principle without being overcome by fear and overcome by other people's wrong influence, and to just be able to stand very quietly and this is who I am. One of the ways that I have found to do this is not to try to say it was right, it was what should be done. I just say, I'm just not good enough to be your friend right now. I actually had to fire a friend of mine once because I was just not in a place where I could deal with the way they behaved. And I really literally had to say, I just do not have the capacity to be your friend now. So I will be your friend from a distance. It's not that I don't love you, but I can't relate to you because for various reasons, I was too vulnerable to her particular weaknesses. And as soon as I saw that it was wiping me out, this is not dharma because I also have to take myself into account. It's just wrong not to take myself into account. If I can just support her as she goes on and on. But also you may decide this just isn't right. Instead of changing, she's just putting all her negativity on me and this isn't good for her either. And yeah, you feel really terrible. And you have to, but that's what you have to learn. You have to learn to make hard decisions and not be afraid of them. And that's why hard things happen. Because and sometimes you just can't help it. I was speaking to someone this morning. My parents have both been gone for 20 years. They've died for a while ago. I was particularly close to my father. Both my parents were lovely, but I was particularly close to my father. But I left home at 18 and I never went back because my life was not with them. My life was somewhere else. It still hurts me. It still does. And I do everything I can to feel better about that. There was no way I could be what he wanted me to be. I just couldn't. It was not my destiny. But it still hurts me to think about it. So these are the things we live with. Your heart breaks. It's like it has a permanently different shape after it breaks. It doesn't really go back to being what it was. It's like a sculptor or like a piece of clay. It gets pinched over here and it just remains that way. And the only thing that saves you is that you expand. I'll give you one more image which is helpful. Actually, Marcia, I wanted to say this one to you because some of the things you said, I thought this might help you. If something bad happens, your hand is black. A trauma happens like this. And so it's right in front of your eyes. And even if your eyes are wide open, everywhere you go, it's all that you can see. And often it was awful. Somebody abused you. Somebody did something really terrible. So you can't say that it didn't happen and you can't say that it wasn't awful. But basically what you do is you move it a little farther away. And you're still looking at exactly the same size black. But you can see it just like that. I can see the whole area now. So this just becomes part of an expanded consciousness instead of completely dominating my consciousness. So for your friend, it's still there. It's just bad, and there it is. But, there's a lot of other realities to her and to you. That's the only thing I've really found that really works. Because you can't, when bad, terrible things happen, they just happen. And there you are. The question was, how can you tell the difference between just anxiety and real intuition about what's right? Fear versus a real guidance. Um, I mean, the answer is that you make a lot of mistakes and then you begin to see the pattern, but that's a terrible answer. So let's see if we can think of another one. It's extremely helpful if you have the possibility in your life of cultivating friends or counselors or priests or whoever whose wisdom, whose impersonal wisdom you learn to trust, and who actually know you. And maybe it's your mother, maybe it's your father, but they're a little dubious sometimes because they have an agenda of their own. So you really have to find somebody that you really know can be impersonal and actually look at it objectively. Because sometimes if you can just put it in front of someone who has more clarity than you, even just their presence listening to you will begin to show you, or they will begin to ask you questions. For myself, this is in my horoscope, and this is also in my chakras. My horoscope says, has a tendency to imagine a difficulty in the future and feels an urgency to solve the not yet present problem in the present. Which, just ask anybody who knows me, and they will tell you, And I also I'm using myself as an example, but you get the point. Okay, so first of all, I began to see that that was a syndrome of mine, so that's a clue. And I'm starting to get really excited and starting to get everybody organized to solve this problem. And I ask myself, is it actually happening? Or am I thinking that this preemptive strike is needed because it might? Okay, and then I've authorized very few people to grab me by the shoulders and say, calm down, because that'll help. The other thing is, I have had a tendency to feel threatened in certain ways when there was no real threat. I feel quite threatened when people don't listen to me, because I'm always right. Although people I love have also said to me very lovingly, you're not right as often as you think you are. So that's all part of it. But I noticed whenever I started feeling that way, I'd start talking faster and faster, and the tone of my voice would get higher and higher pitch. So I learned, as soon as I hear that, whatever I'm saying is now wrong. Even if eventually it's going to turn out to be right, at this moment, everything I'm saying is wrong. So I just stop. In other words, I interrupt the syndrome. And interrupting the syndrome is often enough to be able to tell. And so when there's a certain kind of energy, you just have to say, I'm out of my mind right now if I make any decision. But of course, that has to be balanced against the anxiety that all survival is at stake right now. And if we don't do something, right. But begin to watch it as an objective personification of an energy that you don't want to be following. I would say that one, being able to put in front of others, and time. I mean, whenever you feel that it must be decided right now, you're probably wrong. Unless you're standing in front of a speeding train and you need to move away from it, you probably have time to calm down. So just even the very thought that this has to be done right now is also a clue that there's something wrong with my thinking. Because true intuition actually calms you down. It doesn't wind you up. Fair enough?